The heat shimmered off the sun-baked streets of Redstone, Arizona territory, where red dust clung to everything and everyone. It was 1887, and the small mining town sat nestled in a valley between rocky peaks that glowed crimson at sunset. Belle Thornton stood behind the counter of her small bakery, flour dusting her apron and her round cheeks flushed from the heat of the ovens. At 24 years old, she had learned to make herself as invisible as her generous figure would allow. Belle's bakery, modest though it was, produced the finest bread, pies, and cakes in 3 counties. Her cinnamon rolls were legendary, and miners would walk an extra mile just to taste her apple turnovers. But Belle herself was the subject of less kind commentary. The ladies of Redstone whispered behind their gloved hands about poor Belle Thornton, such a sweet girl, if only she wasn't so large. The men were crueler, making jokes that carried through the thin walls of the general store and saloon. She had arrived in Redstone 5 years ago after her parents died in a cholera outbreak back east. With a small inheritance, she'd bought the bakery from a widow heading to California. Belle had hoped that in a frontier town where survival mattered more than social graces, she might find acceptance. She was wrong. The cruelty followed her like her shadow, only here it was more direct, less veiled by Eastern propriety. That morning, as Belle arranged fresh loaves in the window, Mrs. Henderson swept into the shop with her daughter, a rail-thin girl named Millicent, who was being courted by half the eligible men in town. "Belle, dear," Mrs. Henderson said in that syrupy voice that preceded an insult, "don't you think if you stopped sampling your own goods, you might find yourself a husband? Even out here, men have standards." Belle's hands trembled as she wrapped the woman's order, but she kept her face neutral. She'd learned that defending herself only made things worse. "That'll be 15 cents, Mrs. Henderson," she said quietly. After they left, Belle allowed herself a moment of weakness, leaning against the counter and blinking back tears. This was her life, baking beautiful things that brought joy to others while being made to feel ugly and unwanted herself. That afternoon, she made her weekly delivery to the general store. As she carried a basket of bread down the wooden sidewalk, 3 cowboys lounging outside the saloon made loud comments about watching out for earthquakes and wondering how many horses it would take to carry that load. Belle kept walking, her face burning, until she stumbled on a raised board. The basket flew from her hands, and perfectly golden loaves scattered into the red dust. Humiliation washed over her as she knelt to gather the ruined bread, tears finally escaping despite her best efforts. The cowboys' laughter rang in her ears. Then a shadow fell across her, and a large, calloused hand appeared in her vision, picking up one of the loaves. Belle looked up into the most striking face she had ever seen. The man towering above her stood at least 6'4", with shoulders that seemed to block out the sun. His face was weathered and scarred, with a particularly nasty mark running from his left temple down to his jaw. His eyes, however, were startlingly gentle, a clear gray like morning mist on the mountains. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, and he wore buckskins that marked him as one of the mountain men who occasionally came to town for supplies. "These can be washed," he said, his voice deep and quiet. He gathered the loaves efficiently, placing them back in her basket with surprising gentleness for such large hands. "Thank you," Belle stammered, struggling to her feet. The man stood and handed her the basket. For a moment their eyes met, and Belle felt something shift in her chest, a strange, fluttering sensation she'd never experienced before. "Name's Elias Stone," he said. "I've been eating your bread for 2 years now, best I've ever tasted." Before Belle could respond, he tipped his hat and walked away, his long strides carrying him toward the supply store. Belle stood frozen, watching him go, still feeling the ghost of his kindness like warmth on her skin. That evening, as she cleaned her shop, Belle couldn't stop thinking about Elias Stone. She'd seen him in town perhaps half a dozen times over the years, always keeping to himself, speaking only when necessary. The townsfolk whispered about him, too, the savage who lived alone on Granite Mall Mountain, the one who'd murdered his family back east, or so the rumors went. People crossed the street to avoid him. Mothers pulled their children close when he passed. But his eyes had been kind, and he'd helped her when everyone else had laughed. Elias Stone sat in his cabin on Granite Mall Mountain, staring into the fire and thinking about the woman with the flour-dusted apron and sad eyes. He'd watched Belle Thornton for 2 years now, ever since he'd first tasted her bread and begun making monthly trips to town specifically to buy her baked goods. He'd never spoken to her before today, content to observe from a distance the way she moved through the world, head down, shoulders curved inward as if trying to take up less space. It made him angry, the way people treated her. He'd heard the comments, seen the cruelty. It reminded him too much of his own experience with human nature's ugliest side. Elias hadn't always been a mountain man. 8 years ago, he'd been Elias Stone, successful horse breeder in Virginia, married to Margaret, father to 6-year-old Emma. Then came the fire. He'd been in town selling horses when it happened. By the time he rode home, his house was an inferno, his wife and daughter's screams still echoing in the air. He'd tried to save them, running into the burning building again and again until neighbors physically restrained him. The left side of his face had melted like candle wax, leaving him with a hideous scar that made children cry and women recoil. The fire had been set deliberately by a rival breeder who'd wanted Elias's land. The man confessed while drunk in a saloon, but by then he'd fled to Mexico, beyond the law's reach. Elias had tracked him down and beaten him within an inch of his life, not killed him, though God knows he'd wanted to. That beating, witnessed by Mexican authorities, had made it impossible for Elias to stay in Virginia. He'd fled west, eventually finding this mountain where he could live alone with his grief and rage. But watching Belle today, seeing her dignity in the face of cruelty, had awakened something in him he thought had died in that fire. For the first time in 8 years, Elias Stone felt something other than pain. He felt hope. 3 weeks passed before Belle saw Elias again. She'd thought about him more than she cared to admit, his kindness replaying in her mind during long nights when loneliness pressed particularly hard. But she told herself it meant nothing. A man like that, damaged though he might be, wouldn't look twice at someone like her. It was a Saturday morning when he walked into her bakery. The small bell above the door chimed, and Belle looked up from the cookies she was arranging to find Elias Stone ducking through her doorway, hat in hand. Her heart performed an unexpected somersault. "Mr. Stone?" she managed, wiping her hands on her apron. "What can I get for you?" "Whatever you recommend," he said, and there was something in his voice, a warmth that made her skin tingle. Belle prepared a box of her best items: cinnamon rolls still warm from the oven, apple hand pies, a small loaf of sourdough. Her hand shook slightly as she tied the box with string. When she named the price, Elias paid without question, adding an extra silver dollar. "That's too much," Belle protested. "It's exactly right," he said, and their fingers brushed as she tried to return the change. The touch sent electricity up her arm. For a moment they stood there, neither moving. Belle felt his eyes on her, really looking at her, not with disgust or pity, but with something she was afraid to name. It was too much. The intensity of it frightened her. "I should," she started, backing away. In her nervousness, she misjudged the distance to the counter. Her hip caught the edge of a tray of sugar cookies fresh from the oven. The tray tilted, and hot cookies scattered across the floor in a cascade of breaking porcelain and crumbling sweetness. "Oh, no!" Belle dropped to her knees, trying to salvage the mess. Tears of frustration pricked her eyes. "I'm so clumsy. I'm sorry. The words tumbled out in a rush of self-recrimination. Elias knelt beside her, beginning to help gather the broken pieces. His presence so close made Belle's breath catch. She could smell pine and wood smoke on him, clean and masculine. It made her head spin with longing and despair. "I'm too big for you," she blurted out, the words escaping before she could stop them. It was what she'd been thinking, what her mind had been screaming at her every time she caught herself daydreaming about this man. "I'm too big for anyone. I know what people say. I know what I am. You're being kind, but you don't have to be. I'm not someone you could ever—" She trailed off, humiliation burning through her. Silence filled the small bakery. Belle couldn't bring herself to look at him, certain she'd see pity or, worse, agreement in his eyes. She'd finally spoken her deepest shame aloud, the truth she carried like a stone in her chest. Then Elias's hand, large, warm, impossibly gentle, cupped her chin and lifted her face until she had no choice but to meet his gaze. Those gray eyes held her captive, intense and unwavering. "You're perfect," he said. 2 words, just 2 words, but they shattered something inside Belle that had been carefully constructed over years of hurt. A sob broke from her throat, and then another. Elias pulled her into his arms as she cried into his buckskin shirt, his hand stroking her hair with infinite patience. "You're perfect," he repeated, his voice rumbling through his chest. "Those people who mock you, they're blind, small-minded. You're beautiful, Belle Thornton. Your kindness shows in everything you create. I see you feeding miners who can't pay. I see you leaving bread on Widow Thompson's doorstep. I see you being brave every single day in a world that tries to break you. If that's not perfect, I don't know what is." Belle pulled back, searching his scarred face for deception and finding only raw honesty. "You can't mean that." "I never say what I don't mean." Elias wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I'm not much to look at myself. People cross the street to avoid me. Children have nightmares about my face. I'm a man who lives alone on a mountain because human company reminds me of everything I've lost. But when I look at you, I see home. I see goodness. I see everything I thought died in the fire that took my family. The confession hung between them, vulnerable and true." Belle's heart cracked open, letting in light for the first time in years. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let me come by again. Say you'll give me a chance to prove I mean every word." His thumb still rested on her cheek, and Belle found herself leaning into the touch like a flower, turning toward the sun. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." The weeks that followed transformed Belle's life in ways both thrilling and terrifying. Elias began coming to town twice a week instead of once a month, always stopping at her bakery first. They would talk while she worked, their conversations ranging from the mundane to the profound. He told her about his life on the mountain, the wildlife, the changing seasons, the satisfaction of living by his own hands. She told him about her childhood in Boston, her love of baking, her dreams of one day opening a larger establishment where people could sit and enjoy their food in comfort. But they kept their growing attachment quiet. Belle was acutely aware of how people would react if they knew the mountain hermit and the fat baker were developing feelings for each other. The mockery would be unbearable. So they met in her bakery, and to the outside world, Elias Stone was simply a regular customer. It was Belle who started the secret gift-giving. One morning, she woke with an impulse she couldn't shake. She baked an extra cherry pie. Elias had mentioned it was his favorite, and wrapped it carefully. That afternoon, she saddled the old mare she kept in the stable behind her shop and rode up the mountain trail. She'd never been to his cabin, but she knew the general direction, and several miners had mentioned it was near Eagle Creek. The ride took 2 hours, the trail growing steeper and wilder as she climbed. When she finally found the cabin, a sturdy log structure with a covered porch overlooking a spectacular valley view, Elias was nowhere in sight. Belle's nerve nearly failed her. What if he thought she was being too forward? What if he didn't want her invading his private space? But she'd come this far. She left the pie on his porch with a note. "For your kindness. B." Then she rode back down the mountain, her heart pounding the entire way. 3 days later, Belle found a gift in her own doorway when she opened the bakery before dawn. A small wooden box sat on the threshold, beautifully carved with a pattern of roses. Inside, she found a note in masculine handwriting. "For your sweetness, which far exceeds any pie." The box itself was the gift, she realized, examining the intricate craftsmanship. Elias had made this with his own hands, spending hours carving delicate petals into unyielding wood. Belle held it to her chest, feeling absurdly happy. Thus began their secret exchange. Belle would make the 2-hour ride up the mountain once a week, always when she knew Elias was away checking his trap lines or hunting. She left pies, jars of jam, cookies wrapped in cloth. Once, she brought a warm quilt she'd stayed up 3 nights sewing, worried that his cabin might be cold as winter approached. Elias left his own gifts at her door, carved wooden spoons perfect for stirring batter, a new knife with a handle shaped to fit her hand exactly, wild herbs he'd dried for her tea, a fox pelt to keep her warm. Each gift was thoughtful, personal, showing how carefully he observed her needs and preferences. They never spoke of the gifts during his visits to the bakery, but the knowledge hummed between them like a plucked string, adding a layer of sweet conspiracy to their conversations. Belle felt like a girl again, full of excitement and possibility. She caught herself singing while she worked, smiling at nothing. The other shopkeepers noticed the change in her demeanor. "You're positively glowing these days, Belle," Mrs. Cooper from the dress shop said one afternoon. "Got a secret beau?" Belle's face flamed. "Don't be silly. It's just good weather." But Mrs. Cooper's eyes narrowed speculatively, and Belle realized she'd have to be more careful. The last thing she wanted was for gossip to poison this precious thing growing between her and Elias. One evening, as Belle made her weekly journey up the mountain, she misjudged the time and found herself still on the trail as the sun set. The temperature dropped sharply, and her mare became nervous in the gathering dark. Belle urged her on, anxious to reach the cabin before full night fell. She was still half a mile away when she heard it, a mountain lion's scream, that distinctive shriek that made every muscle freeze with primal fear. Her mare reared, and Belle barely managed to stay in the saddle. The horse bolted, running blind through the trees, while Belle clung to the saddle horn, branches whipping her face and arms. They burst into a clearing, and suddenly Elias was there, seemingly appearing from nowhere. He grabbed the mare's bridle, speaking low and calm until the horse stilled. Then he looked up at Belle, and his face was terrible to behold. "What the hell are you doing up here in the dark?" His voice was harsh with fear-turned anger. "Do you have any idea how dangerous these mountains are at night? That cat could have—" He bit off the words, jaw clenched so tight Belle could see the muscle jumping. "I'm sorry," she said, sliding from the saddle on shaking legs. "I didn't realize how late it had gotten. I just wanted to—" She gestured helplessly at the basket she'd somehow managed to keep hold of. "I made apple butter. You said you missed it from your childhood." Elias stared at her, something fierce and tortured in his expression. "You risked your neck for apple butter?" "For you?" Belle corrected quietly. "I risked it for you." He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the anger had been replaced by something rawer. "You can't do that. You can't put yourself in danger for me. If something happened to you—" He shook his head. "I couldn't bear it, Belle. I've already lost everyone I cared about. I can't lose you, too." It was the most direct admission either of them had made. Belle stepped closer, emboldened by the emotion in his voice. "Then tell me to stop coming. Tell me these gifts mean nothing. Tell me you don't feel what I feel." "I can't," Elias said roughly, "because it would be a lie." He reached for her then, pulling her against his chest. Belle wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling his heart thundering against her ear. They stood like that for a long moment, two damaged people clinging to each other in the mountain darkness. "Stay tonight," Elias finally said. "It's too dangerous to ride back now. I'll take you home at first light." Belle knew she should refuse. An unmarried woman spending the night at a bachelor's cabin, the scandal would be enormous if anyone found out. But she was tired of caring what people thought. She was tired of being scared. "All right," she agreed. Inside the cabin, Belle looked around with undisguised curiosity. The single room was surprisingly tidy, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall, a sturdy bed in the corner, and shelves lined with books. A work table sat beneath the window, covered with carving tools and half-finished projects. Everything spoke of a solitary but purposeful life. Elias busied himself building up the fire and making coffee, his movements economical and practiced. Belle noticed he'd placed all her previous gifts throughout the cabin. The quilt lay across his bed. Her jars of jam lined one shelf. Her pie's empty tins were stacked neatly near the wash basin. Something about seeing her contributions integrated into his space made her throat tight with emotion. "You've kept everything," she observed. "Course I have." Elias handed her a tin cup of coffee. "They're treasures. First gifts I've received in 8 years. First things anyone's done for me out of kindness rather than fear or obligation." He paused, then added with painful honesty, "First time I've felt human in longer than I can remember." Belle cupped the warm mug, gathering courage. "Why did you leave Virginia? The truth, not the rumors." So Elias told her about Margaret and Emma, about the fire, about his hunt for vengeance that had ended not in satisfaction, but in more emptiness. He told her about the rage that had consumed him, how he'd become someone he didn't recognize, brutal, capable of terrible violence, how he'd fled to the mountains to prevent himself from becoming a monster completely. "I'm not a good man, Belle," he finished. "I've hurt people. I've been cruel. The scar on my face is nothing compared to the scars on my soul." Belle was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. Then she set down her cup and took his large, scarred hand between both of hers. "Do you know what I see when I look at you? A man who lost everything and survived. A man who recognized his own darkness and chose to remove himself rather than hurt innocent people. A man who makes beautiful things with these hands," she squeezed gently, "and speaks kindly to a woman the rest of the world considers worthless. That's not a bad man, Elias. That's a good man who's been broken by circumstances beyond his control." "You don't know what I'm capable of," Elias warned, but his hand turned in hers, fingers intertwining. "I have a temper. I've killed men who deserved killing, and I'm not sorry for it. There's violence in me, always simmering just under the surface. And yet, you've never shown me anything but gentleness." Belle met his eyes steadily. "You help old Widow Thompson chop wood." "Yes, I know about that." "You leave game on the doorsteps of families who are struggling. You carved roses into a box for a fat baker no one else would notice. Those are the actions that define you, not the worst moments of your life." Elias pulled her closer until their faces were inches apart. "Why do you keep calling yourself fat like it's a curse? You're beautiful, lush, real. Every other woman in that town looks like they'd snap in a strong wind, but you're soft and strong and perfect. I dream about your curves, Belle. I dream about holding you and knowing you're solid, that you won't disappear like smoke the way everything else in my life has." The confession stole Belle's breath. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with desire, with need, with genuine appreciation for her body rather than despite it. "I've been mocked my whole life, called names, told I'm too much, too big, too ugly to ever be wanted. You can't just erase that with pretty words." "I'm not trying to erase it. I'm trying to show you that those people are wrong." Elias's thumb traced her jawline. "I know what it's like to be judged on appearance, to be seen as a monster because of how you look. The difference is, my face deserves the revulsion it inspires. It's a mark of my failure, my loss. But there's nothing wrong with you except the cruelty of small-minded fools who wouldn't recognize beauty if it baked them bread every morning." Belle felt tears tracking down her cheeks. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "I'm afraid to believe you. Because if I let myself believe that someone like you could want someone like me, and then you realize your mistake, it will break me, Elias. It will break me worse than anything else in my life has." "Then we're both afraid," Elias said, "because I'm terrified that you'll wake up one day and really see me, see the monster under the man, and run screaming. I'm terrified that this thing between us is too good to be real, that it's just two lonely people pretending they can heal each other. but I'm more terrified of not trying, of letting fear steal this chance at happiness." They sat before the fire, holding each other as night deepened outside. They talked for hours, sharing their fears and wounds, their hopes and secret dreams. Belle told him about her parents' death, about arriving in Redstone full of hope only to face years of systematic cruelty. She told him about the nights she cried herself to sleep, about the men who'd courted her as jokes to entertain their friends, about the deep loneliness of being surrounded by people yet utterly alone. Elias told her about the nightmares that still woke him, about how he sometimes heard Emma calling for him in the wind. He told her about the rage that scared him, about the days when he wanted to walk into town and hurt everyone who'd ever said a cruel word to Belle, about how much he wanted to touch her, but was afraid his damaged hands would somehow contaminate her goodness. "Nothing about you could contaminate me," Belle said fiercely. "You're not damaged, Elias. You're human. You've suffered, but you haven't let it make you cruel. That takes more strength than anything else." When exhaustion finally claimed them, Elias gave Belle his bed and made himself a pallet before the fire, despite her protests. Belle lay in his bed, surrounded by his scent, wearing one of his clean shirts, and felt safer than she had in years. Through the darkness, she heard his voice. "Belle, thank you for seeing me, really seeing me." "Thank you for seeing me, too," she whispered back. Belle returned to town at dawn, and as she'd feared, her overnight absence had been noticed. Mrs. Henderson was waiting outside the bakery along with 3 other women from the church auxiliary. "Belle Thornton," Mrs. Henderson said with acid sweetness, "where have you been all night? Your shop never opened yesterday afternoon." Belle's mind raced. She couldn't tell the truth, but she was a terrible liar. "I felt ill. I was resting." "Strange. Your mare was gone from the stable, and Mr. Jenkins says he saw you riding up the mountain trail yesterday." Mrs. Henderson's eyes gleamed with malicious pleasure. "You weren't with that savage Stone, were you? Oh, Belle, even you could do better than that scarred mountain man." The other women tittered. Belle felt humiliation burning through her, but beneath it, anger kindled, hot and righteous. "Elias Stone is worth 10 of any man in this town," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "He's kind, honorable, and decent, which is more than I can say for people who spend their time gossiping and being cruel." Mrs. Henderson's mouth fell open. "Well, I never." "Maybe you should," Belle shot back, unlocking her shop door. "Good day, ladies." She shut the door in their shocked faces, her hands trembling with adrenaline. She'd never stood up for herself like that before, never defended anything publicly. But hearing them insult Elias had unleashed something fierce inside her. The fear of social consequences paled beside the offense of hearing him called a savage. The repercussions came swiftly. By afternoon, traffic in her bakery had slowed to a trickle. The ladies who usually ordered cakes for their socials stopped coming. Even some of the miners who'd never cared about social niceties before seemed to avoid her shop. Belle tried to tell herself it didn't matter, but watching her livelihood dry up was terrifying. 3 days later, she was closing up shop when 5 cowboys walked in, the same ones who'd mocked her the day she met Elias. They were drunk, and their faces held ugly intentions. "Heard you're keeping company with Stone," the leader said, a man named Kurt Ryman. "Heard you've been going up to his cabin. That true?" Belle's heart hammered. "My business is my own." "Not when you're making a fool of yourself," Ryman said, moving closer. She could smell whiskey on his breath. "See, we figured you're lonely. Figured maybe you'd appreciate some company from men who aren't monsters. Men like us." His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Belle tried to pull away, but he was too strong. "Let me go." "Come on, sweetheart. You put out for a scarred freak, you can put out for normal men." The other cowboys laughed, moving to surround her. Terror flooded Belle's system. She opened her mouth to scream, but Ryman clapped his other hand over her face. "None of that now." The door exploded inward. Elias Stone seemed to fill the entire bakery, his presence enormous and terrible. His face was a mask of cold fury, his gray eyes like ice. "Get your hands off her," he said, his voice so low and deadly that the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ryman released Belle and turned, trying for bravado. "This ain't your business, Stone." "She's my business." Elias moved forward with predatory grace. "You have 3 seconds to apologize to the lady and leave." 1. The cowboys exchanged glances, calculating odds. There were 5 of them, and 1 of him, but something about Elias's stillness, the coiled violence in his frame, gave them pause. 2. "We were just having fun," one of them said nervously. 3. Ryman pulled his knife. It was the wrong move. Elias moved faster than Belle's eyes could follow. One moment, Ryman held the knife. The next, he was on the floor, screaming, his wrist bent at an unnatural angle. The knife clattered across the floorboards. "Anyone else?" Elias asked the remaining cowboys. They scrambled backward, hands raised. "Get him to the doctor, and if any of you ever come near Belle again, I won't stop at a broken wrist. We clear?" They dragged their whimpering friend out the door. Belle stood frozen, shaking with reaction. Then Elias was there, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Did they hurt you?" "No, you came in time." Belle looked up at him, seeing the rage still simmering in his eyes. "You would have killed them if they'd hurt me, wouldn't you?" "Yes." He said it without hesitation or apology. "I'll protect you, Belle, always, even if it means becoming the monster people think I am." Belle took his scarred face between her hands. "You're not a monster. You're my hero." Then, before fear could stop her, she pulled him down and kissed him. It was her first real kiss, and it was everything she'd dreamed and more. Elias went still for a heartbeat, then responded with a hunger that made her knees weak. His arms came around her, lifting her off her feet, and Belle felt cherished and desired and perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elias pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you," he said. "I love you, Belle Thornton. I've loved you since the day you dropped those loaves in the street and looked at me like I wasn't a monster. I love your kindness, your strength, your beautiful curves, your sweet smile. I love everything about you. I love you too," Belle whispered, and felt the truth of it in every cell of her body. "I love you so much it scares me." "Then be scared with me," Elias said, "but don't leave me. Please don't ever leave me." "Never," Belle promised. "I'm yours forever." Winter came early and hard to Arizona Territory that year. By mid-November, snow lay heavy in the mountains and temperatures plummeted. Belle worried constantly about Elias alone in his cabin. They continued their secret courtship, but with the weather worsening, his trips to town became less frequent. It was a Tuesday morning when the blizzard hit. Belle woke to a world of white, snow already 2 feet deep and still falling. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling her windows. She built up her fires and went about her baking, but her mind was on the mountain. Was Elias safe? Did he have enough supplies? By evening, the storm had worsened. Bell was preparing to close early when Sheriff Blackwood burst in, snow covering his coat. "You know how to reach Stone's cabin?" Bell's blood ran cold. "Yes. Why?" "Group of miners got caught in an avalanche up on Granite Maw. Stone's cabin is the nearest shelter. We need to warn him there might be injured men heading his way, but more importantly," he paused, "that avalanche may have hit his place. Jenkins saw it from his claim. It came down right where Stone's cabin sits." Belle didn't remember making the decision to move. One moment she was behind the counter, the next she was grabbing her heavy coat. "I'm going." "In this storm? You're crazy. You'll die out there." "Then I'll die trying to reach him." Belle's voice was steel. "That's my man up there, Sheriff, and I'm not letting him face this alone." Blackwood stared at her. "Your man?" "Yes." Belle met his eyes without flinching. "My man. Now, are you going to help me or not?" To the sheriff's credit, he didn't argue further. He helped her saddle her mare and saw her off, though his face said he thought he'd never see her alive again. The ride up the mountain was a nightmare. Snow blinded her, wind tried to tear her from the saddle, and the cold bit through every layer of clothing. Belle's mare struggled through drifts that reached her knees, then her shoulders. More than once, Belle thought they'd have to turn back or freeze to death. But each time, she pictured Elias buried in snow, possibly injured or dying, and found the strength to push on. She was almost to the cabin when she saw it, a massive pile of snow and debris covering half the structure. The avalanche had indeed hit, slamming into the back of the cabin with enough force to partially collapse the roof. Belle's scream was lost in the wind. She half fell from her horse and began digging through the snow with her bare hands, screaming Elias's name. Her fingers went numb, then began to hurt with a deep, burning pain, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. If he was under there, if he was trapped, she had to reach him. "Belle!" The voice came from behind her. Belle spun to find Elias emerging from the tree line, carrying an armful of firewood. He was alive. He was whole. Relief crashed over her so powerfully that she collapsed into the snow, sobbing. Elias dropped the wood and ran to her, pulling her up and into his arms. "What are you doing here? Are you insane? You could have died on that trail." "I thought you were dead." Belle wept into his chest. "I thought the avalanche killed you, and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just had to come." He carried her into what remained of the cabin, which was actually more intact than it had appeared. The avalanche had destroyed the back storage room and damaged the roof, but the main living area was still standing. Elias set Belle before the fire and began stripping off her wet clothes with brisk efficiency, replacing them with his dry shirt and wrapping her in furs. "Your hands," he said, his voice cracking. Belle's fingers were white and waxy, severe frostbite. "Oh, God, Belle, your beautiful hands." "Don't care," she said through chattering teeth. "You're alive. That's all that matters." Elias filled a basin with cold water and immersed her hands, beginning the slow process of warming them. The pain as sensation returned was excruciating, and Belle bit her lip to keep from screaming. Elias held her through it, his face twisted with anguish. "You risked your life for me," he said. "You beautiful, foolish, brave woman, you could have died." "So could you," Belle countered, "and I wasn't going to let you face it alone. I meant what I said, Elias. I'm yours. In life or death, I'm yours." Tears tracked down Elias's scarred face. "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do. We deserve each other." Belle leaned forward and kissed him, tasting salt and smoke. "We deserve happiness, Elias. Both of us. We've both suffered enough." The storm raged for 3 days, trapping them in the damaged cabin. They used the time to shore up the roof, to talk, to plan. And on the second night, when the wind howled its loudest and the fire burned low, they became lovers. Elias touched Belle with reverence, worshiping every curve, every soft place, showing her with hands and mouth and body that she was indeed perfect. Belle, in turn, traced every scar on his skin and loved him past his damage, past his fear, into a place of healing they could only reach together. "Marry me," Elias said afterward, holding her close in his bed, her body fitted against his like they were made for each other. "I know I'm asking you to give up town life, to live up here with me. I know it's hard and lonely sometimes, but I swear I'll spend every day of my life making you happy. I'll build you the biggest kitchen you've ever seen. I'll carry water and chop wood and hunt game. I'll cherish you and protect you and love you until my last breath. Marry me, Belle." "Yes," Belle said, no hesitation, no doubt. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'd marry you today if there was a preacher on this mountain." Elias laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "Then we'll go to town as soon as this storm breaks and find a preacher. I want you as my wife, legal and proper. I want the whole world to know you're mine." "And that you're mine," Belle added fiercely. "Don't forget that part." "Never," Elias promised. When the storm finally broke, Elias and Belle rode down the mountain together. Belle's frost-bitten hands had been carefully tended and were healing, though they still ached. More than her hands, her heart felt full, overflowing with love and hope and the fierce joy of having found her match. Redstone greeted their arrival with shock. Belle and Elias rode down the main street side by side, and conversation stopped mid-sentence. Curtains twitched in windows. By the time they reached the church, half the town had gathered to watch. Reverend Morrison stood on the church steps, his face a mask of disapproval. "Miss Thornton, Mr. Stone, I understand you wish to marry." "That's right," Elias said, his arm around Belle's waist. "Today, if possible." "I'm afraid I can't do that in good conscience." The Reverend's voice carried to the crowd. "Miss Thornton, you've been staying with this man unchaperoned. The scandal," Elias interrupted, his voice dangerous, "is that this town has spent years making this good woman feel worthless because of her size. The scandal is grown adults mocking and tormenting someone whose only crime is not fitting their narrow definition of beauty. You want to talk about sin, Reverend? Start there." The Reverend flushed. "Now see here." "No, you see here." Belle stepped forward, finding her voice. "I love this man. He's treated me with more respect and kindness than anyone in this town ever has. Yes, we've been improper. Yes, we've broken social rules, but I'm not ashamed. I'm proud to love him, and I'm proud that he loves me. Now either marry us, or we'll find someone who will." Mrs. Henderson pushed forward from the crowd. "Belle, dear, you're making a mistake. He's a savage, a murderer." "He's nothing of the kind," Belle shot back. "You don't know him. None of you do. You've judged him based on rumors and fear, the same way you've judged me based on my body. Well, I'm done caring what you think. I'm done being small and quiet and trying to earn approval I'll never receive. I'm marrying this man, and if that offends you, don't come to the wedding." Silence fell over the crowd. Then, from the back, a voice spoke up, "I'll come." Old Widow Thompson pushed forward, her weathered face kind. "I'll come to your wedding, Belle. You've been nothing but good to me, and Mr. Stone has too. He chops my wood every week and never asks for thanks. That tells me more about his character than any rumors." "And I'll come," said Jenkins, the miner who'd warned the sheriff about the avalanche. "Stone saved my brother's life 3 years back when he fell in a ravine. Never asked for payment, never wanted credit. He's a good man." One by one, others stepped forward. Not everyone. Mrs. Henderson and her circle remained tight-lipped and disapproving, but enough people spoke up that the tide began to turn. The Reverend, seeing the mood shift, cleared his throat. "Very well, I'll perform the ceremony, but I expect you both to attend church regularly and demonstrate proper Christian behavior going forward." "Deal," Elias said. They were married that afternoon in the small church, with Widow Thompson and Jenkins standing witness. Belle wore her nicest dress, plain blue calico, but clean and pressed. Elias wore his buckskins but had trimmed his hair and beard. When he said his vows, his voice was strong and sure, and when he kissed his bride, the small crowd actually applauded. Afterward, there was a modest celebration at Belle's bakery. She served the cakes and pies she'd baked that morning, and Elias stood at her side, his hand never leaving the small of her back. People who'd never spoken to him before approached cautiously, offering congratulations. He was polite, but reserved, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, but enduring it for Belle's sake. That night, as they prepared to ride back up to the mountain, they'd decided to live primarily in the cabin, with Belle keeping the bakery for the times they came to town. Sheriff Blackwood pulled Elias aside. "I owe you an apology," he said gruffly. "I believed the rumors, thought you were dangerous, maybe even crazy. But watching you today, seeing how you are with Belle, I was wrong. You're a good man, Stone." Elias shook his hand. "I am dangerous, Sheriff. Don't mistake that. But only to people who threaten what's mine. As long as folks leave Belle in peace, I'm no threat to anyone." It was as close to a promise and a warning as anything could be. The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Elias expanded the cabin, building Belle a proper kitchen with a big stove and ample workspace. Belle baked, experimenting with new recipes and preserving supplies for the harsh mountain winters. They worked side by side, their rhythm perfectly synchronized, two halves of a whole finally united. Elias proved to be a patient teacher, showing Belle how to track game, how to read weather signs, how to move through the forest silently. Belle, in turn, brought warmth and laughter to the cabin. She decorated with curtains and quilts, filled shelves with books ordered from catalogs, and cooked meals that made Elias groan with pleasure. They made love often and with increasing confidence, learning each other's bodies and preferences. Elias never tired of telling Belle how beautiful she was, how perfect her curves felt under his hands, and Belle, gradually, began to believe him. The voice in her head that called her ugly and unlovable grew quieter, drowned out by Elias's steady devotion. Spring brought new challenges. Belle discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. "What if something goes wrong?" she worried, her hands on her still flat stomach. "I'm so big, Elias. What if my size makes the pregnancy dangerous?" "Then we'll deal with it," Elias said firmly, "together. But Belle, you're strong and healthy. There's no reason to think anything will go wrong, and even if it does, I'll be with you every step of the way." He was true to his word. As Belle's pregnancy progressed and her body swelled with new life, Elias treated her like precious china. He carried water, insisted she rest, massaged her aching back and swollen feet. When she felt huge and ungainly, he would kiss her rounded belly and tell her she'd never been more beautiful. "You're carrying our child," he'd say, awe in his voice. "You're creating life. How could that be anything but perfect?" In August, Belle went into labor during a thunderstorm. For 16 hours Elias held her hand, wiped her brow, and whispered encouragement while lightning split the sky outside. When their daughter finally arrived, small but healthy, with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes, both parents wept. "Emma," Belle said, knowing without asking that Elias would want to name their daughter after the child he'd lost. Elias clutched the tiny bundle to his chest, his scarred face wet with tears. "Emma Stone. God, Belle, she's perfect. You're perfect. I never thought I'd have this again. A family, a home, love. Thank you. Thank you for saving me." "We saved each other," Belle corrected, watching her husband cradle their daughter with infinite gentleness. As Emma grew, Belle and Elias found themselves becoming part of Redstone's community in ways they'd never expected. Belle reopened her bakery part-time, coming to town twice a week with fresh goods. Elias would accompany her, carrying Emma in a sling against his chest, and the sight of the fierce mountain man tending his baby daughter softened even the hardest hearts. Mrs. Henderson never did come around, but most others accepted the Stone family. When a harsh winter threatened the town's food supplies, Elias organized hunting parties and taught survival skills. When illness struck, Belle made nourishing soups and bread for the sick. They became valued members of the community, not despite their differences, but because of what those differences had taught them about compassion and strength. They had 2 more children, a son named James and another daughter named Rose. The cabin grew to accommodate the expanding family, and the mountains rang with children's laughter. Belle's bakery became successful enough that she trained 2 younger women to help her, creating jobs and passing on her skills. Elias never lost his edge. He remained a formidable man, protective of his family to the point of ferocity. But he also laughed more, smiled more, engaged with the world instead of hiding from it. Belle had awakened something in him that he thought had died in the Virginia fire: hope, joy, and the belief that happiness was possible even after devastating loss. On their 5th anniversary, Elias took Belle back to the spot where they'd first kissed, in her bakery, after he'd saved her from Ryman and his friends. He'd purchased the building and renovated it, turning the upper floor into a proper apartment. "For when we're in town," he explained, "so you don't have to ride up and down the mountain with 3 children, so you can have a place that's just yours, where you can bake and dream and be the businesswoman I know you are." Belle toured the space, bright and airy with a modern stove and large windows overlooking the street, and felt her heart overflow. "You did this for me? I'd do anything for you." Elias pulled her close. "You saved my life, Belle, not just that day in the storm, but every day since. You saw past my scars to the man underneath. You gave me back my humanity. A building is the least I can offer in return." "You've given me everything," Belle said, tears streaming down her face. "You've given me love, family, confidence, purpose. You made me believe I was perfect exactly as I am. That's worth more than any building." They stood in their new space, holding each other as the sun set over Redstone, painting the red dust golden. Through the window, they could see their children playing in the street below, watched over by Widow Thompson. Emma, now 5, was bossing her younger siblings around with all the authority of an eldest child. James was trying to catch a frog. Rose was eating dirt. "Our life turned out pretty good, didn't it?" Belle said. "Better than good," Elias corrected. "Perfect, because it's ours." Years passed. Emma grew into a confident young woman who had her mother's kindness and her father's strength. James became a skilled hunter and tracker, following in Elias's footsteps. Rose developed a talent for baking that surpassed even Belle's considerable skills. The cabin on Granite Mall Mountain became a place of legend, the home where the fat baker and the scarred mountain man built a love that transformed not just themselves, but their entire community. Young couples would hike up the mountain to ask Belle and Elias for advice. Troubled souls sought refuge in their unconditional acceptance. The Stone family became synonymous with second chances and the power of seeing past surface judgments to the truth beneath. Belle's hair turned gray, and her body grew softer with age and childbirth. Elias's scars faded but never disappeared, and his hair went white. But the love between them never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared experiences and weathered trials. On their 25th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the mountain cabin for a celebration. As Belle watched her family, this impossible, beautiful family that had grown from 2 broken people finding each other, she felt overwhelming gratitude. That night, after everyone had left, Belle and Elias sat on their porch, watching stars emerge over the peaks. Elias had his arm around Belle, her head on his shoulder, their bodies fitted together after decades of practice. "Do you remember what you said that day in the bakery?" Belle asked. "When I told you I was too big for you?" "You're perfect," Elias quoted, "and I meant it then, just like I mean it now. You're still perfect, Belle Stone, more perfect every day. Even though I'm whiter than ever, even though my hair is gray and I have more wrinkles than I can count, especially because of those things." Elias kissed her temple. "Every gray hair is a year we've had together. Every wrinkle is a smile shared, a laugh exchanged, a moment of joy. Your body carried our children and nourished them. It's weathered storms and hardship and time. How could any of that be anything but beautiful?" Belle turned to look at her husband, this man who'd seen her when she was invisible, who'd loved her when she was unlovable, who'd spent 25 years proving that she was exactly right, just as she was. "I love you, Elias Stone, more than words can say. And I love you, Belle Stone, forever and always."